Welcome to Landmark Talks Property, a podcast by Landmark Information Group that covers all things property in short and intelligent podcasts.
Hello. In this podcast, we'll be exploring the introduction of the grey belt land concept and the role data can play in helping us to understand and identify it. Joining me today are Josh Rains and Ed Griffiths. Let's begin with some introductions.
Hi, I'm Josh Rains, Managing Director of Landmark Geodata. We provide a range of data and geospatial solutions and products to market, namely among those ProMap and EnviroCheck, supporting sort of land and property professionals at the early stages of due diligence.
I'm Ed Griffiths. I'm Head of Business and Client Analytics at Barbour ABI. Barbour ABI tracks planning from its earliest stages, including how policies like grey belt are playing out. Our data reveals emerging land use trends and policy impacts on development.
So here's the big question that everyone seems to be asking. What is grey belt? Why has it been introduced? Can you help guide us?
It's $1 million question, isn't it? What is? We were talking about this earlier on, weren't we? I said to you, I think that grey belt is brown belt in the green belt, which is far too many belts for anyone, perhaps. But what I meant by that was really that grey belt are areas of land that are suitable for development, but are located within areas of ecological significance, I suppose.
Yeah, and completely agree with the definition. I think it's that sort of focus on previously developed land within the green belt as one sort of interpretation. And I think that was my understanding for a long time. I think that was the largely publicised view of it, particularly within both trade, but also sort of public sector, public sort of news outlets as part of that. The other definition, the other key part of it that I've sort of grown to understand a little bit more is also its sort of secondary definition, or a contributing definition, I should say. Land that does not strongly contribute to the key purposes of greenbelt. So that can actually be undeveloped land, but it doesn't contribute to that position of why greenbelt is in place. And let's remind ourselves of what we mean by that. There's those various definitions, A through E, I believe. But what we're really focusing on here is land that doesn't check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, land that isn't preventing neighbourhood towns from merging, and land that isn't preserving the setting and special character of historical towns. So again, what we're really saying there is it's both this concept of previously developed land in a greenbelt area, and a consideration as part of that, but also undeveloped land as long as it's not contributing to those definitions that I've mentioned there. So what I really think we'll start to see, and what the interesting factor will be is how these land parcels come to light. Are they going to be sort of land parcels that are specific in their own right in certain areas, not sort of connected to, I guess, the urban area they're attached to? Or is it going to be sort of incremental land parcels which are sort of adjacent, and you can sort of argue, okay, well, actually, no, they aren't going to challenge urban sprawl because it's a 2-hectare sort of site alongside a residential or sort of commercial area. So I think that's going to be the really interesting factor that we see come to light as grey belt's definitions get understood and utilised more.
Grey belt dovetails very clearly into the art versus science debate and conversation that we often have. It's subjective, and if it's subjective, it's art. Really, it's if it. I don't think anywhere you can categorically get an area of land and have it. It's one or the other. It's open to subjectivity, and it's not uncommon to have an application go in on a newly defined area of grey belt land that still gets rejected. So I think it's a good example again of how there is always ambiguity in the planning processes.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it's something that we're starting to see more. So number one, it offers those opportunities to bring forward new sites and potential across those, but also to bring back previously challenged sites or rejected sites. And this was the case with a recent sort of solar farm example in the Oxford Greenbelt, where it was previously rejected based on the impact that it could have across those, but actually it's now been reclassified under a grey belt sort of statement, and as part of that, it sort of goes to this definition, this interpretation fact of, well, is it contributing or is it protecting sort of that urban sprawl or sort of those other statements? And actually, in this scenario, it's on agricultural land, but it's also argued that a solar farm could be placed and removed without then sort of impacting the agricultural land and the ability to revert. So you've sort of seen there a definition that sort of does lend itself to interpretation and that back and forth between the investor and the developer, or sort of the landowner bringing it forward for a proposal and the planning authority and the back and forth that's needed to understand how the use case is going to be defined.
Sounds like grey belt could be more of a state of mind for planning applications and planning approvals, where it's just about pragmatism, right? Unlocking things that otherwise would have been disregarded because they're in the green belt, that could actually add value back into the area and into the place as well.
So, despite all the ambiguity and sort of necessarily unclearness of perhaps of what grey belt is, for those who want to unlock the opportunity from it, is there a role data can play to sort of help bring more of the science-based approach to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with all things data, there's a real it's trying to understand the use case first. So I think from a data perspective, you can look at it and say, well, does it answer my question wholly and completely and absolutely? Okay, well, in which case you'll have to really understand the proposed use case, the very individual characteristics of the land parcel and everything like those. Or you can look at it in the capacity of, okay, I've got a definition. And yes, it's interpreted, but there is a written definition to what these are. And therefore you can assume some sort of guiding principles and rules in terms of data creation. So you could look through historical maps, you could look through historical capabilities to understand, was there previous development across those? You can overlay that with existing green belt areas, and there you go, you've got your previously developed sort of land capabilities and in greenbelt. But equally, that sort of secondary definition that we talked about in terms of the contributions, well, how do you codify that? That's an opportunity there to say, well, let's look for adjoining parcels of land that won't create corridors or those type of capabilities. And I think that's where the data enthusiast within me gets excited by the opportunities of really trying to translate a written definition into a sort of a codified capability as a part of that. So I think it's got two roles to play with regards to data. There's informing very specific decision makings on individual sites, but I think there's also the capability to create screening and early stage analysis tools and understanding opportunities that can be used at a regional or national scale to sort of identify the different definitions or opportunities that it brings forwards.
Yeah, stacking data sets is the way to unlock areas of land from a developer's perspective, and grey belt on its own is information, but it's not necessarily helpful information. But once you layer that in with all of the other data that exists in the world, planning history, land use accessibility, constraints over the land, refusal patterns, deprivation indices, all of this stuff layered up with grey belt, brownfield, green belt, it really unlocks quite a powerful tool and quite powerful insights for developers and people looking to invest in areas.
Yeah, I think your statement there on refusal patterns is another interesting sort of view on grey belt of where it's going to be adopted most in terms of its use case. It's no secret that green belt, while a very sort of clear topic and well understood sort of statement across all sort of factors of the sector, but also into the public, it is not the most significant use case of land in our country, and so it's going to be really interesting to see where across the country and which local authorities leverage this definition, and where developers are looking to leverage this definition for opportunities more and more, and whether we see any patterns in refusal or acceptance as a result of grey belt.
Yeah, totally agree. And
there's definitely a balance, as you said, an element of art versus science in the whole process. Don't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like we say, we started the conversation with two views of how you can define it, and while that is very much the intent, I believe, of this is to bring a definition and bring a scientific-based approach, to bring a sort of measurable statement that you can measure. The fact that one of the definitions is checking urban sprawl, preventing merging. There's lots of sort of interpretations and varying interpretations that could lead to. So I think it's very much in that sort of definition of both, where it can be interpreted as a measurable statement of fact of this is that, but also there's an art and a local characteristic that needs to be considered under any definition for a parcel of land.
So, look, by unlocking the opportunities that grey belt give us, should we be able to, what impact do you see that having on the trends we've got currently in planning applications? Do you think there'll be an increase or a decrease in the type of applications or the number of applications, or will there be some locations that will perhaps benefit from unlocking this?
I think urban fringes is probably where I see the most the most potential for a shift in planning volumes. It could also help unlock some stored plans, perhaps encourage SME-led developments where they're looking for these opportunities across the country. What it will do is test local authorities' consistency.
Yeah.
So, this application approved, this one rejected, seemingly no reason for either or. When these applications start going in these newly defined grey belt areas, they'll need to make sure that they're on top of their game.
Yeah, I think so. I think, like you say, it will lead to a combination of new applications, but also the revisiting of previous applications that were rejected for those reasons. So I think that there will be a sort of flurry of activity, and then we'll settle into a norm of the expectations as the private and public sector work together to understand and refine a written definition to a practical definition of some of these things. I think we might also see, to your point, Ed, there, that balance of small-scale investments and small-scale development opportunities, because when we're talking working within the green belt, you're going to be looking at incremental opportunities and parcels of land as opposed to huge swathes of areas being shifted across. So we'll see the sort of the role that SME developers can continue to play in meeting the overall targets and the sort of 5-year housing plans for developers, and how they start to get leveraged into local plans, but also sort of promoted through those factors as well. I think the other factor that we'll really see across this is a balance of planning activity, particularly within those urban areas, and whether we see a shift from consistently submitted urban areas and urban sites and diversifying those within specific local authorities, and a balance between where activity is being centred. And it goes back to your point then of, well, how does that balance of where activity is being centred lead itself alongside sort of consistency, because there's going to be very different approaches and very different views and responses with regard to these areas, because of the fact that Greenbelt is a really, really emotive thing at the end of the day within local areas. So that consistency is going to be a fascinating sort of trend that we'll see it come to fruition.
Yeah, I think a kind of final remark would be, the call to action for developers would be that developers that can move early on well-supported grey belt cases, but joining up some of the conversations we've had in the last few days around data-supported and data-enriched applications, move early on these grey belt applications that are well-supported with data-led applications. They're the ones who are going to benefit the most. So if you can do that, sounds easy, if you can do that, you'll probably do well.
Thanks, Ed and Josh, for the discussion. I think where Greybelt is concerned, we can expect an uptick in activity where Greybelt provides a release valve. Now, while the intent is clear to open up more opportunities through a clear definition, the practicalities are starting to be seen, but the consistency is the thing we'll be looking for over the next couple of years. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the Landmark Talks property channel, where you can listen back to all our episodes in our planning mini-series.
Thank you for listening to Landmark Talks Property. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, please hit subscribe. This podcast is for general purposes only. The views expressed are those of the hosts and guests and do not constitute professional advice.